to have a story, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'd like to try and explain some of our story, our daughter's journey to sound. I guess to understand a little bit, you're going to need a little bit of backstory. And so when our daughter Reece was born, they always do newborn hearing tests in the hospital. And our daughter actually failed 2 of them. She failed the one shortly after birth, and then the next morning as well. We were told by a lot of people that there wasn't that big of a deal. She could have fluid on her ears from the birth. You know, don't freak out about it. Lots of kids failed their newborn hearing tests, and so we didn't really get concerned about it. Fast forward a little bit, as Reece got a little older, she started to develop. She's moving around a little bit. We had several toys, naturally, and any toy that had like a light that lit up or colors that changed, if it was within her scope of vision, she would turn to it. But if any toy that we had that had just like a music or a tone or any sort of auditory stimulation, it never would cause her to turn. And so naturally babies are, really curious. And so it was kind of an alarm at that point as parents that we picked up on that maybe something wasn't quite right. As she got a little older, we realized that she didn't really seem to be triggered by any sort of sound. So we started to kind of do our own little unscientific experiments here at the house. And we realized if you yelled at her like, "Hey," really loud, she would turn and laugh. And so we knew that she could hear, but it had to be pretty loud for her to actually hear it and then in turn and respond to it. So we ended up getting referred to the local ear, nose, and throat specialist here in town. And so they did some more ABR testing, and she failed those as well, which ended up referring us to Vanderbilt in Nashville to the audiologist in the Cochlear division there. They had all of her files, all of her tests and everything else, and so they wanted to do an ABR, an MRI, and a CAT scan. Well, with the child who's barely a year old, they do all of that under sedation. So under the same anesthesia, they were going to monitor her brain waves to see if there was any sort of response and stimulation. And then they also did an MRI and a CAT scan. I guess in our heart of hearts, we had always kind of knew what was coming, but when all the results were in and the test results were read to us, it had a different weight when the experts and the doctors definitively said, "Your child is deaf." I think it hit my wife a little harder right then, but in my mind, I guess I kind of always felt that way. Or if she wasn't deaf, she had very severe and profound hearing loss. We knew there was some issue, but it took me a couple weeks to process that, and it wasn't until some weeks later that it really hit me, what those words actually meant. Now, there are far worse problems that you can have as a parent or as a person in this world, but for us as new parents, obviously you want your kid to be as healthy as possible. You don't want them to have to struggle. You know good and well that that's not going to be the case. They're going to have issues throughout their life, but you just want it to be as easy and as good for them as possible. And so this was something that we weren't really planned for. But at that point, they also gave us the MRI results, and they said everything developed physically. It's there. There's no abnormalities. Everything is intact. So me, as a very logical person, everything's sort of kind of, black and white in my world. I said, "Doc, why, if everything developed properly, why does she not hear?" It would make more sense to me, to my logical mind. Oh, well, this part didn't develop properly, or she's totally missing this part of her inner ear. At that point, it would make sense. But to me, when you tell me that everything developed properly, it begs to question, well, why does she not hear? The doctor told us, unfortunately, that's something that they don't have good answers for, is the why. in the hearing space. But at this point, they told us everything's okay. She is a great candidate for cochlear implants. We think cochlear implants will give her total access to sound, and so you guys need to decide if that's something you would want to pursue. And at that point, if you do want to pursue it, we'll start the paperwork, get all the process started, submit it to insurance, and see if it's approved and whatnot. So that was a difficult decision. Both my wife and I, as hearing parents, we felt that our daughter should also hear. Not to say that we couldn't have went down the deaf route and strictly spoke and used sign language. We just felt as though this was a decision that would help her the most in the long run throughout her life. So we decided to go through with the cochlear implant process. Fast forward a few months, everything's approved, and so the next thing is to schedule a surgery date for them to actually physically implant the interior pieces. So we made the long trip to Nashville, and we are in the hotel the night before. Kara and I are just nervous wrecks because we know what's to come. Reece, she's such a good baby, and she just has no idea what's just around the corner tomorrow. So we wake up the next morning, the day of surgery, and obviously with anesthesia and surgery, you can't have food and water within 10 or 12 hours. And so really difficult to get that through to your toddler who generally wakes up and eats and drinks. We can't give her food because she has surgery. And so that's really difficult to explain because, again, she can't hear us. And so we've had this difficult barrier of attempting to communicate with her. But she did a good job. She was a little fussy at times, but overall, she took it like a champ. O'clock.
Yeah, it's been a few months.
Okay. So just a reminder, so Getting cochlears on both sides. It goes on your arm. Put it on your arm. No, don't eat it. Don't eat it. Yeah, and then you can wear that little thing.
I will show you guys back out to the waiting area.
Your hair's a mess.
My name's Kelsey. I'm the nurse with her. Oh, let's go see. You want to see the rocking chair? That's fine. Oh, gracious. Here we go. Goodness gracious.
Your juice bag? Do you have some more juice? We're too tired.
We get a free gown out of this. Can I have some pizza? Can I have some pizza? You driving this food truck somewhere?
The way the cochlear process works, you have a surgery day and then you have an activation day, and they usually let 2 to 3 weeks transpire between those two so that the swelling and the incision site and everything can heal. So at that point, our next step was to actually have them turned on. You know, we've all seen those videos on Facebook where, you know, the kid hears its parents' voices for the first time and it just melts your heart. And there's definitely people cutting the onions in the room somewhere, because they'll inevitably bring tears to your eyes. The team at Vanderbilt advised us that that's not generally what happens. It's more of the exception. Most kids are evidently terrified. So we went in with low expectations to our activation, knowing that obviously we wanted this heartwarming moment, but we also knew that most kids are terrified because they've never had sound, and so it scares them.
Pushing you really hard. Did you hear that?
Reece really didn't have like she never really had like a light bulb aha moment with the activation, but she also didn't have a bad reaction, and so we were very thankful for that. We were able to see that she could hear, and so we were instructed to go home, and then we had to go back 1 week later to get a tune-up. In that 1 week though at the house, Reece took her first unassisted steps. She just stood up and started walking all by herself. She walked all the way through the kitchen to the refrigerator and then back.
You're just Miss Independent today. Oh. Yay! Look at you go! You're doing good. Oh.
Her babbling seemed to change. Maybe we're just imagining it, but it definitely seemed to change a little bit. And so we just could not believe how different this kid was. Her balance was immediately improved, and she was able to watch TV and shows that she had watched multiple times before. They now had a little bit of sound with them, and there's this clip of her laughing to Curious George, and it was the cutest thing. I remember sitting at work and Kara sent me the video of that, and I couldn't believe how much different this child was already. If you're still watching at this point, I hope this may have shed some light on our story, our process, and the journey that our daughter has had to sound. It was hard at times, it was difficult. Lots of questions ran through our heads, why and how did this happen, and did we do something wrong? But at the same time, we're just so thankful that we have such a great kid, and we are surrounded by such a great support system. I mean, honestly, the only word I can think of to really describe the whole situation is thankful and grateful. I can't imagine going through a situation like this without our church family or our immediate family. Folks at work have been so kind and helpful and understanding throughout this process. But if you're watching to this point, I thank you. Hopefully this has maybe answered some questions. Maybe you've been following us on Facebook, and maybe you've been curious how the whole process went, and how we figured out she was having issues and that something just wasn't right. Hopefully this has answered some of those questions. But thanks for watching. Stay tuned, and we'll keep you up to date on our journey and the progress that she gets to make.